Hold on a second. Am I a black dragon?
No, wait, maybe? Actually, no, definitely not.
The year is 2004. After dozens, if not hundreds of hours of hunting, you have reached the true final boss of the first Monster Hunter game, and it is beyond anything that you could have ever imagined. A creature not included in any trailers, any promotional materials, or any official guides about the game, Fatalis. In the long and storied past of Monster Hunter as a series, there is one specific group of monsters that is often held above the rest of them in a few ways. Specifically in terms of their status in the lore, their level of power within the lore, often considered creatures with so much power that they could destroy the entire planet if they felt like it, and the fact that they were never actually talked about or shown in any capacity by the developers outside of the game itself for a very long time, almost as if Capcom themselves were hiding their existence. And also, of course, just how these monsters were treated as fights in the games too. And these are the Black Dragons, also known as the Forbidden Monsters or Dangerous First Class Monsters, all of which are community coined terms to categorize these specific creatures. The Black Dragon moniker first became a thing because of the title system. All monsters have titles officially attributed to them. Duramboros is the Tail Hammer Wyvern. Zamtrios' title is the Transforming Shark. They tend to be fairly literal, and usually a monster's title is unique compared to other monsters. Black Dragons are the sort of exception. The translation of Fatalis' title is very literally just Black Dragon, nice and simple. Alatreon's title is the Blazing Black Dragon, so Black Dragon with a modifier in front. Miralis' title is the Molten Black Dragon, or Smelting Black Dragon is another common translation, but again, it's Black Dragon with a modifier word in front of it. Generally speaking, we do also count Crimson Fatalis and White Fatalis, also known as Old Fatalis, when talking about Black Dragons, because they are variations of Fatalis himself. It's never officially stated, it's not like a lore-driven thing, but according to the internal naming system that they use for monster IDs, Crimson Fatalis is considered a Fatalis subspecies, and Old Fatalis is considered a Fatalis rare species. So they're like the equivalent of Pink Rathian and Gold Rathian as a bit of a comparison. That said, today I want to go back and talk about the sort of evolution of these monsters from their original versions in their first appearances, what made them special, how they functioned, and how these fights have evolved into the modern games, with 2 Black Dragon fights already being properly remade into some of the best fights in the series. And while it's technically not a Black Dragon or even an Elder Dragon at all to begin with, I also want to talk about how this contrasts with Zoh Shia, who is intentionally designed to show that he was created from parts of Black Dragons, and so he uses moves or effects that are otherwise associated with the Black Dragons, including ones that have otherwise not returned to the modern games. Basically, I want to talk about what the term Black Dragon has meant throughout the years, how it has changed both to the players and to the developers when designing these fights too. Starting off at the beginning then, we have Fatalis. To unlock his quest to begin with, all the way back in the original Monster Hunter, you had to have completed all online quests, you had to be at least HR 20, and the last requirement I see people disagree on pretty consistently because it was never actually confirmed in any way, is usually being said as 100 total large monsters hunted, or specifically 50 Rathalos and 50 Rathian hunted. It was never really agreed upon. That to say, it had a hefty requirement just to unlock the quest to hunt the monster to begin with. Not only was he the final boss, but he was a final boss behind hidden hurdles. Once you got into the fight, what you found was a big, imposing, regal creature that almost looked too simple. For a game with monsters that range from Yonkutku to Kezu to Monoblos to Kirin, they're all pretty wacky, strange departures from real-life animals, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that they are so very clearly Monster Hunter monsters. They are designed to be what they are, to be interesting and cool, and in some ways also lovable. Fatalis, on the other hand, is very closely designed like a typical Western fantasy dragon from like mythological stories of various kinds. He almost too closely fits into what the human mind envisioned if you just heard the word dragon, and it feels weirdly unnatural. Like it doesn't quite fit the vibe of the game in the way that the other monsters are made, but that is the intention. They wanted him to be unnerving. They wanted his mere existence to concern you. Mechanically speaking, Fatalis wasn't too complex in his first version, but still quite unique. His fight took place in Castle Shrade, a country that is said to have been destroyed in one night, according to the handler in Iceborne. In the first game, there were multiple variations of Fatalis quests, 4 of them to be specific, and each one was basically a slightly different layout. The map had 2 courtyards and a bunch of potential siege machinery, but in some quests, only 1 courtyard was open, in some quests you only had ballistas, and in some quests quest, both courtyards were open and you had the ballistas, cannons, and dragonators active as well. The reasoning for this was how you hunt Fatalis. It's not generally a one hunt and done type of thing. Instead, you would get a heavily shortened quest timer of only 15 minutes, and if you reach a damage threshold, the quest would just end successfully with the repel. Fatalis would leave, but then the next of the Fatalis quest that you go on, the damage would remain. So essentially, it's one fight drawn out over multiple quests done in a row, really emphasizing how big and scary this monster actually is. As far as his moveset though, it was pretty limited, slow and lumbering, but incredibly powerful, to the point that coming in contact with the monster just while he moved around would hurt you. Not to mention getting hit by his actual attacks of course too. He only really did things like generic fireballs, some tiny little forward bite attacks, a little bit of a charge and some tail whipping shenanigans, and a little body slam as well. All of these attacks are super slow and don't look like they should be that impactful, which makes it even more terrifying that most of these would one-shot hunters even in endgame armor. Fatalis himself then stayed pretty much the same when returning to the next few games, aside from things like his quest timers changing, and by the time we're talking about 4th gen with Generation's Ultimate, for example, Fatalis does not carry health between quests anymore, so you can technically repel him just so it isn't a failed quest, but you don't get the kill and it doesn't make subsequent quests easier either. With Monster Hunter G, or Monster Hunter Freedom, which was the portable version of the same thing, the G rank expansion for the base game, we got our second monster to talk about today, which is Crimson Fatalis. Visually, this is just Fatalis but red and with one wickedly overgrown horn. He is fought atop a volcano instead of in a castle, and with no siege equipment to help out while you're attacking him. He has a bit less variety of his physical attacks, but he gains a lot more fireball-based attacks, and he can also summon meteors down from the sky, which is sort of like the signature difference from him compared to regular base Fatalis. He still was very dangerous, just from his general body movements as well, and this version of Fatalis was almost like fighting an artillery cannon with spikes on the side of it, which is even scarier when the flying artillery cannon tries to slam into your face from the sky. Crimson Fatalis moved less, but caused a lot more chaos and danger for anyone that dared to exist nearby, and the lack of siege weaponry didn't really make it easier either. At the start of the quest, you had to immediately move forwards, and if you didn't, you just died. This was something that the developers knew was in the game because they found it while playtesting, but decided to keep it because it sort of fit the aura that they wanted these monsters to have, and it also had what players called an armor mode, which is something that it would enter at certain points of the fight that made its body literally harder. It made weapons bounce off of most of its body parts without extremely high sharpness or a skill to bypass bouncing, but other than that, it worked quite similarly to regular Fatalis. Multiple quests, multiple repels before you're ready to go in for the proper kill, and like with Fatalis being the sort of final boss of the original Monster Hunter, Crimson Fatalis was considered the final boss of Monster Hunter G and Monster Hunter Freedom. As I said earlier, by monster IDs behind the scenes, Crimson Fatalis is technically considered a subspecies, though this isn't canon or a lore thing in any sense, it's just a technical categorization. But if we were to go by existing logic of what the monster variations are in the series, Crimson Fatalis is supposedly a Fatalis that survived from the first game's fights, grew a wicked horn, and got a lot angrier and redder in the time that followed, developing extra moves that it could use in the process, which would essentially make it like the grandfather of all deviant monsters from Generations and Generation Ultimate, which are all monsters that survived a very difficult near-death experience and then grew and mutated in strange ways. In the second generation, we had the addition of a third monster to this grouping, which was White Fatalis, who as of just a couple of years ago has been in the process of a name change to Old Fatalis, as Capcom has decided that they prefer the name Old Fatalis for him for whatever reason. Honestly, I am hopeful that this name change means that he'll be making a return, and I feel like being the final title update of the expansion for Monster Hunter Wilds is not that unlikely based on the breadcrumbs we've been given so far. As said, I'll be calling him White Fatalis for the rest of this video because that's what I'm used to calling him, and it just fits the naming convention of Crimson Fatalis as well, of course. White Fatalis was meant to be like a cosmic horror evolution of the creature, even more mysterious than the other Fatalises. Fatali? I don't know what the plural for these monsters should be, but I hope I never have to actually find out in the games. This Fatalis is white, of course, as the name implies. He's got a big fluffy beard, and his original version in Monster Hunter DOS was fought atop the tower. He uses red lightning instead of fire, and for a long time people have just generally called this dragon lightning because of the coloring, but in technical terms it is just a red colored lightning. It doesn't actually do dragon element or anything like that. As far as his actual attacks and mechanics, he's actually surprisingly similar to the other Fatali. He of course replaces fireballs with new red lightning attacks. He can call lightning down from above in similar patterns to the meteors from Crimson Fatalis, but of course it's lightning instead. He has some lightning added to some of his standard Fatalis melee parts of the moveset as well, just to make them a bit more dangerous, and he has an armor mode like Crimson Fatalis, where he will just make his scales harder and make you bounce off of most body parts without massive sharpness or the skill to ignore weapon bounces. I know a lot of players loved using using gunlance for this monster in this game due to gunlance shells ignoring hit zones and bouncing entirely. He did also get a cool special attack where he flies up on top of one of the runes on the side of the tower on like a pillar and just calls down a bunch of lightning on the arena, striking all over the place. And as you can see here, in the original fight in Dose, there was one specific spot in the arena that did not get hit by lightning, but the devs of course found this and got rid of it for Freedom Unite. As an extra note to sort of follow the pattern here, Wilds Fatalis was sort of the unofficial final boss of Monster Hunter Dose's online hunts. So for Monster Hunter 1, it was Fatalis. For the expansion of Monster Hunter and the Monster Hunter Freedom portable version, it was Crimson Fatalis. And now for the first second generation game, the final boss was White Fatalis, presenting a clear theme of these monsters being considered powerful above all else. The next new monster added within this grouping that we're talking about today was in Monster Hunter Tri, and it was the final boss of that game's online quest as well. So another black dragon, another final boss. And this is of course Alatreon, the first monster today that does not have Fatalis in the name. His title was the Blazing Black Dragon, and he was a very different take on the concept of a black dragon from Fatalis 2. He was also a large dragon with black scales, but he had a very demonic look to him. The curled beak, the gigantic scary spiky horns, the spikes along his wings, and the holes in his wings to make him look like ancient and battered, the finned tail, and then the tusks that he has coming out from him as well, are all just adding together to make him look like some sort of evil, unnatural abomination of a creature, partially shown by his scales being the reverse direction of most actual animal scales to just really dig in that point. He's also known to cause chaos wherever he goes, crazy weather inclemencies, and an interesting note that some Alatreon even can make their homes in underwater caves because they are just that adaptable of a monster. Where Fatalis was essentially a mega powerful version of a classic fantasy western dragon concept, Alatreon's mystique came from his ability to use every element in his fight, with the exception of water, at least in his original version. He essentially had two modes, which were ground mode, where he would use things like fireballs and dragon augmented melee attacks or slight hops into the air just to slam back down on you too. Separately, he also had a flight mode, a flying mode, where he would use ice attacks like causing big slabs of ice to rain down from above, or icy breaths and other projectiles. And his more melee attacks in this mode are where his thundery attacks came from. On the ground, Alatreon is weakest to ice damage, and in the air, Alatreon is weakest to dragon. So he did have element and resistance swapping mechanics even in his original fight to a certain extent, and if you broke both of his horns, he would no longer go into flight mode for the rest of the fight. So a horn break mode swap stopping mechanic was also present in his original version, but this was actually removed for 3 Ultimate and was only actually a thing in the base game of Tri. Speaking of 3 Ultimate, then we have our last new black dragon, Miralis, the Molten Black Dragon. This is an extremely interesting one, as he is the only massively oversized black dragon in the series. His general shape is very similar to Fatalis, except the wings themselves, and of course he is essentially made of volcanic rocks, or at least scales that have a similar texture to volcanic rock, and he produces magma just as a part of his biological functions. He's basically like a kaiju, like a rocky molten Godzilla, and the entire point of him is to feel so overwhelmingly impossible to defeat that you are paralyzed with fear by the mere sight of him. He lives in the Tainted Sea, which has a red tint due to the pure death that follows Miralis as he moves around, pouring out unbelievable amounts of heat into the sea just by existing there, which then radiates through the water and kills most living things around him. He uses the water to keep himself from overheating, but wipes out an untold amount of smaller life forms in the process. As for the fight itself, you fought him on the shoreline, where you could dip into the water and attack him using underwater combat that was unique to the 3rd generation games, but he would also, some of the times, come out of the water and fight on land. Most of his attacks were either magma raining down from the sky, shot out from the large tubes on his wings, fire attacks that came directly from his mouth, or physical attacks where he'd basically just try to crush you with his pure weight, as well as a tail swipe to protect his rear end. And like the other Fatalises, being too close to him when he moved in certain animations would also deal damage to you. His weak spots, called magma cores, were the big swirling magma bits on his body. You had to damage his wings enough to be able to attack some of the cores, and if you disabled the correct cores, you could stop him from spewing magma balls out of his wings as well. So he did have a certain amount of mechanical depth, even if his actual moveset was relatively small. Then we moved to the 4th generation games, which brought back all of the black dragons except for Miralis, with some slight changes too. For the Fatalises, they removed the necessity of doing multiple quests in a row for them. Repels could be still a thing that was happening, but it was entirely reasonable to kill these monsters in one singular quest. By the time of Generations Ultimate, the next game, also in the 4th generation, these repel results would no longer longer reduce the health of the monsters for subsequent quests either. Fatalis itself gained a fire breath attack and also had a blast powder-like effect that it could use for a slightly delayed explosion. It also gained a fireball animation from Miralis' moveset too, and some other moves from Miralis' sort of animations as well. And the new bite attack it gained as well that could give you the Dragon Blight ailment. Crimson Fatalis got the same new attacks as regular Fatalis for the most part, but lost the armor mode mechanic that it previously had. In the G-rank version, it also got a sort of heat aura attack that it could do and release during certain animations to apply environmental damage to nearby hunters, as well as applying fire blight to anyone too close to it during certain animations too, really just sort of amplifying the feeling of absurd power just emanating from his existence. White Fatalis returned in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate as well, being fightable in Castle Strayed now, but a variation of the map that had a big terrifying black hole looking vortex in the sky. He has similar new attacks to base Fatalis, but lightning based of course, and unlike Crimson Fatalis, he did not lose his armor mode, instead having the armor mode swapped to just being active when he is enraged, instead of how it used to work before this point. He also gained a new super attack reminiscent of his old sitting on top of the tower pillar, but this time flying towards the vortex in the sky and then screaming as lightning rained down from above. In Generations, Alatreon returned, but only with some very minor changes. Then we hit 5th generation games, specifically the Iceborne expansion, where we had remakes of 2 of the Black Dragon monsters. The first one we had happen was Alatreon, and an important note is that this is the first time any of the Black Dragons had been given a monster icon to represent them, instead of the old question mark symbol. In Iceborne, Alatreon had been heavily revamped and reimagined, but kept a lot of the same design philosophies and similar animations for a lot of his attacks. Visually, he was just an enhanced version of what he used to be, looking even more imposing, but being basically the same except for being more muscular in a lot of places, and somehow even more evil and abnormal looking. He now also has a water attack where he spits little globules of like oil at you that would inflict water blight if they hit you, but also were flammable if you hit them with a fire attack too, and with that he officially became a 5-element using monster. He still had elemental modes, but unlike his original version, these didn't constrict his moveset, and they weren't locked to being on the ground or in the air. He could use pretty much any move that he had in any of his modes. He went from having 2 modes to 3 as well, and instead of being tied to ground or flying, they were elemental, signified by the color of his glow. He would start the fight either in fire mode, where he was weakest to ice element, or ice mode, where he was weakest to fire element, and then which one he started in depended on the version of the quest you did. After a couple of minutes in his first form, he would then switch to dragon mode, in which he was weakest to dragon element itself. After a couple of minutes in dragon mode, he would then do Eschaton Judgment, which is his new big supernova attack that just blasted the entire arena with unavoidable damage. By default, this attack is strong enough to one-shot any hunter, but the power was reduced in multiple stages depending on how much elemental damage that you did to him during the first couple of phases of the fight, and if you did enough, it was entirely survivable. After this, he would switch to the 3rd mode, which was the opposite of the mode he started the fight in. Move to dragon mode for a bit after that, and then Eschaton Judgment again, and then repeat that cycle over and over. If you broke one of his horns, which you could only do when he was in dragon mode, he would then not switch to the opposite element mode after Eschaton Judgment. So if you break a horn in a phase where he started with fire mode, he would then go back to fire mode after Eschaton Judgment instead of switching to ice mode, and you could use that to make your same elements effective consistently instead of needing to swap around in each phase. As a whole, this was very faithful to the original mechanics of the monster, but bringing them much more to the forefront and putting them right in your face and making them just more important and impactful to the fight. And as a whole, I think it really added to the feeling of an unstable creature completely unable to control its own power, and I really feel like this was emphasized by things like his ice little crystals that were created on the ground being able to explode after contact with his lightning. After Alatreon, the final monster released for Iceborne was a returning Fatalis with an absolutely massive glow up. The original Fatalis design was intended to emanate raw power by having a limited moveset and attacks that looked like he was barely willing to even lift a finger or put in any effort to fight you, and yet still could one-shot you with these tiny motions. But Iceborne treated Fatalis in a bit of a different way. The arena was Shrade once again, but an updated version of it, and his moveset was sort of a lot of returning attacks, but with a lot more variations for his physical attacks and more variations for his fireballs. More varieties of breaths as well, including one of my favorite attacks in the series, where Fatalis does this like big fire breath in a cone that gets blocked by certain bits of terrain or by shields, so you can like hide in tiny little pockets of safety to not get blasted by it. And most importantly were 2 big new mechanics. The first was the super attack he was given, where at different thresholds of health, he would fly up in the sky and shoot down a massive map-spanning fire breath that was so hot it would literally melt metal in seconds, which is an insane level of power showing off in there. Instead of finding a way to survive it, the only thing that you can actually do is hide from it, or avoid it entirely with movement, because because being hit by this attack is certain death. The other mechanic that was new was to do with his horns. If the monster made it to around half health without having both horns broken, he would get extra powerful blue fire attacks that could one-shot people extremely easily, which added a whole extra layer of difficulty where you had to really focus as much of the damage as possible on the head for the first half of the fight, or else you'd have a much harder time in the second half because of that. And as a result, you had to be a bit careful about where you placed the damage, which was also a problem because this quest had a 30-minute timer, meaning that you didn't really have a whole lot of spare time to think about where you put the damage, you just sort of had to put it in. And that meant that you had to really focus on the head without having it actually lower your overall damage. And a fun little extra note about this fight too is that Iceborne Fatalis got a pin attack that brought a bit of its lore to life, in which he is said to have melted down armor from hunters, essentially embedded within his scales, strengthening his hide. And the pin attack that he gets in Iceborne just has him essentially heat his chest up, smack a hunter with his chest, and then they stick to him for a while, basically like burning onto him, and just a fun little nod to that concept represented in game. It's also worth noting Safi Jiva while we're here, the adult version of Xenojiva, who, while not a black dragon, his title is Red Dragon, and a lot of people theorize that he is on a similar power level to the black dragons, though none of this has ever really been publicly commented on by Capcom, so he's not a part of that group. But I like mentioning him while talking about these regardless. The final thing then to mention is Zoh Shia. I made a whole video back in the day talking about Zoh Shia and how he is basically a culmination of the black dragons, an amalgamation of them put together using attacks that can be directly traced back to each of them, as well as some attacks from other monsters as well, potentially too. But he most noticeably has a lot of his attacks directly from the Fatalis trio, and while he is not a black dragon himself, in fact he's not even an elder dragon, he clearly is intended though to represent the concept of the black dragons. He isn't at the same level of power as the actual ones, but the logical way to interpret this is that the ancient civilization used bits and pieces of black dragons when creating this construct, and beyond it just being a super cool fight as a result of that, the lore implications are immense, suggesting that the ancient civilization not only was capable of defeating black dragons, but actually harnessing their power for their own uses. And that brings us to where we are right now, in the time after the final title update for Wilds, but before the expansion. And I think Zoh Shia is the perfect sort of breadcrumb to give us hope of a very black dragon related storyline coming to pass within the expansion, and if so, I would love to see that, whether it ends with like a new dire Miralis, which would be awesome, or a new like white Fatalis, old Fatalis type creature at the end too, or maybe even, hey, a fully brand new black dragon. That is always a possibility. That pretty much does it for today then, everyone. A sort of look back at the black dragons, or dangerous first class monsters, or forbidden monsters, whatever you want to actually call them. There's never really been an official agreed upon term, just various things that have stuck in the player base and community over the years since the start of the series. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and let me know your own thoughts on these monsters down in the comments below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.